Have you ever felt like you have this insatiable curiosity for life? If so, I want to welcome you to the Brunson Experience, a show about nothing in particular, but everything all at once. Join me on my journey to understand the world, ponder the mysteries, and learn from the greats. Travis Allen, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So for those that are listening at home right now, Travis owns ProSolve, which is just completely revamping the whole education space. Travis, we chatted a little bit about this off mic, but what's kind of the story behind ProSolve? How'd you get into it, and what's the mission?
Well, I actually started this journey 15 years ago when I was 17 years old. And to tell you a little bit about my story, so I'm in education reform now. ProSolve is a K-12 curriculum that focuses on building human skills in education. But to go to how I entered into this space, I was in my senior year of high school in Georgia, where I was taking notes on my smartphone in my high school, in my senior class. And the policy was no cell phones allowed. And so my teacher took up my device, called my principal, and I went home in trouble that day. And I went home so frustrated and did what most kids do. I complained to my parents. My dad eventually said, "Shut up. If you don't like education, then do something about it." And so I spent the next 3 months building a YouTube video showing how one-to-one mobile learning would transform education. Imagine if every student had an iPod Touch. What could you do in education? That video was picked up by Steve Jobs, and throughout Apple education, it went viral and throughout the world. And by complete accident, I fell into the world of education technology. So since then, I focused on speaking on any stage that would, have me, and talked about education reform. And it led me later to create ProSolve, the company I have today.
Okay, so a couple things come to my mind right out the gate. Number one, were you at all worried you'd be able to make money doing this? It seems like one of those things that feels so abstract. It's like, can I turn a profit here? Can I actually make this into a living? What was your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was never a destination of making money for the starting of this, right? Initially, it started as this video and people just starting to want me to come speak at conferences. And I actually remember how it happened. Apple actually invited me to pay my own dime to drive to Florida to go speak to a bunch of superintendents when I was 18. And I thought it was so cool. I was like, absolutely. And every time I did a speaking gig, I would get 4 or 5 more requests from different people in the audience. And I remember very distinctly when the next person, called me up and said, "Well, we'll pay for your flight and hotel." And I was like, that was so cool that they would, do that for me. And then the next time I got a call, they asked me, "What's your speaker fee?" And it wasn't until then that I realized I could and should be charging for this. And, I thought I was saying some big number. I was like $500. They were like, absolutely, deal. So that's how I got started into it. And then I went to college, of course, where I started focusing on making this movement for education reform and rallying other colleagues around me. And, it wasn't for a while that we started focusing on sustaining revenue for us as an organization in order to have the impact on education we wanted. At the end of the day, we need money to create tremendous impact in the world. And so we had kind of this approach of, I hate the term nonprofit. It implies that you don't need money to make a difference. And I hate the term for-profit. It implies that all you care about is a bottom margin profit. And so we actually brand ourselves as a for-purpose company. It's somewhere in between. We realize that we need to grow and provide some form of value in order to be sustainable.
Interesting. So, well, and I even want to back up a little bit more here. So we were introduced through your sister, Ashley, and your whole family seems to just have a bit of a can-do attitude about things. kind of a, yeah, why not? Sure, I'll go and just reform education because why not? And I mean, and Ashley's done some really cool things with her life as well. So growing up then, at 18, you're already out speaking, you're already out doing this. Why did you think you could do that?
Yeah, it's actually funny because it is the very foundation that my parents provided for me that our company now builds curriculum to provide to the K-12 school district. So I'm actually going to answer this by starting with what we believe is so imperative in education, and then talk about how my parents did it to help me be entrepreneurial and problem solving oriented. For me, here's my belief on education reform and where we're currently at as a system. When we think about much of the purpose of school, often it is to prepare us for the workforce and to build well-rounded humans as a whole. And for most of human history, career readiness looked like physical labor, right? 85% of Americans were farmers at one point in time. And so that is what the workforce needed. Then what happened in the 1700s is we created machines to do the physical labor for us, the industrial age, and this devalued physical labor. And it was a very crazy time in history to live because the whole workforce was disrupted, and it ushered us into what I call the knowledge era that we've been in for about 250 years. And basically what that means is the key to workforce readiness success was knowledge. If I can just get a 4-year college degree, I'm guaranteed success in the workforce. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. And the reason I believe for this is just like we invented machines to do the physical labor for us, we have now invented machines to do the knowledge for us, the internet and artificial intelligence. And because of this, it has ushered us into a new demand in the workforce, one in which we call human skills. The things that make us uniquely human, the things that AI cannot do, we need to build an education system that fosters those. I'm talking about the social and emotional intelligence of our students. I'm talking about grit, resilience, adaptability, entrepreneurial mindsets. These concepts make us relevant in the workforce of today. We don't have an education system that builds these skills. It is by design still focused on building an era of knowledge. I was fortunate enough to have parents that intuitively, I don't necessarily think it was intentional, build and fostered with my siblings and I a culture of human skills that allowed me to have the grit, resilience, and fortitude to believe that I have the ability to solve any problem around me if I only am willing enough to put the effort and energy it takes to solve that problem. So there were many things that my parents did that I feel like really set me up for success. And they were things like allowing me to fail, allowing me to make mistakes and work on building friendships and relationships, and having a social life also is a key piece to that. But I'll give you a very specific example. My mom asked for my advice often and regularly since the age of 12. And I realized that this is not the norm. But when an adult, like a parent, asks for your advice, it starts to build a belief that you matter and that you can shape and influence the world around you.
That is really interesting. In my home growing up, it's funny. I had a similar thing. My parents often took my advice as serious, and I wasn't. I was homeschooled for a good chunk of my life, and then I went to a private school, Williamsburg Academy, which I think you might be familiar with. I think they've
Yeah.
rebranded as Williamsburg Learning now. And yeah, and that's what it was. It was taking youth, and there's kind of this, I think there's a fine balance, and I'm kind of curious your opinion on this, but there's kind of a fine balance. You don't want to tell kids they're special just because, they're God's gift to the green world. But at the same time, treating them like adults at an early age, from my perspective, and that was a big core part of my upbringing as well, was we're going to treat you like an adult, but that comes with a burden as well. Like, you have to behave responsibly. We didn't have curfews in my home. That didn't exist. It was just behave like an adult. So it's kind of cool hearing that your mom also came to you and said, hey, what do you think? And, what's your opinion? And treated you as though you were an equal in certain contexts. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that.
I totally agree with you. There is a stark difference between telling someone they're special and that they, for no reason, they have whatever it is that maybe they don't, versus setting the conditions for the capacity for success. Those are very different. And sometimes I think they can be confused with one another. My parents weren't the types that were like, oh yeah, you're so amazing, you're so awesome, like overinflating an ego. Instead, they were challenging if you don't like something, what are you doing to solve? How are you being the change you want to see in the world? And I think that's a very different, nuanced perspective. And we see this in students and kids today is like we have a huge helicopter culture in parenting right now that I think is so detrimental to our individual problem solving ability as students, right? We are too helpful. We do too many things for our kids. And here's the example I give when I think about this is there's three levels of helicopter parenting. There is the worst level for me when I use the tying the shoes as an example, right? The worst level as a parent to solve this for your kid is I'm going to make them wear Velcro shoes till they're 18 years old. I'm going to remove the problem out of their life. How often do we do this for our kids? And then the second layer is where most of us probably find ourselves. I'm going to teach my kids what I know. I'm going to teach them the knowledge I have. That's great for a knowledge era. That's how you get ahead in life, is you get access to knowledge. In the world we live in today, I think that's doing a disservice to tell your kids the answer. I think what I'd like to see society move towards looks like this. You go to a 5-year-old, you say, oh my gosh, your shoes are untied. You might want to do something about that. And a 5-year-old can say, hey, Google, hey, Siri, hey, ChatGPT, how do I tie my shoes? And get the collective wisdom of billions of internet users to find the most effective way to do that. The real value, though, was that they learned to solve their own problems at a very young age. No, they do not rely on an adult to solve their problems for them.
There's so many things that I want to ask about or comment on with that. I recently actually recorded a video yesterday on generational wealth. I mean, completely off topic from what we're talking about currently, except for one major piece, and that was the big issue with a lot of wealthy entrepreneurs is they give their kids everything, right? And generational wealth, that's the fastest way to lose it, is to just go, hey, I was successful. Here's all my money. And it's over. They don't ever acquire the skills necessary to continue that generationally. And the same thing's happening. And the analogy I used even in my video was the mom that won't let their kids ever go play outside because heaven forbid they might fall down and scratch their knee. And so there's kind of a funny piece here where we often get really pulled into this, I have to protect my children, I have to protect the kids or whatever. And as a result, I can't ever let them fail because vicariously they're suffering. Oh, my child's suffering and that hurts me. So it's too painful for me to bear. Let me just solve that problem for them. And I think it's a huge problem in our society right now.
It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes that I find to be so true. And that is, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And it is the cycle in which we live in all the time, where we are often, if we grew up having a hard time in life, we want to give everything to our kids. We want to make their life easy because we had it hard. And what we don't realize is the thing that made us great is sometimes that productive struggle of life and going in that direction. And so that's partly what we want to see is how do we build that environment, those conditions for all students to succeed.
So you're a father now. You were given a lot of good things by your parents that were unique. And I mean, and from my perspective, being raised in a somewhat alternative education style, very unique. I think the way you were raised was unusual, but I'm sure you've added to that. What are the things you've kind of stacked on top of that for your own kids?
Yeah. So I'm one of four, and I have four kids myself, 8, 6, 3, and 1. And so, what has been so great is that my work that I do professionally influences and greatly impacts how I think about raising my own kids. And there's a lot of things that I believe in on the values of how I raise my kids that I think focus on building their human skills, their self-efficacy, and so on. And so one of the first things I'll share is the power of siblings. There's been a lot of studies that show there's a correlation of grit, problem solving, perseverance as to how many siblings you have, which makes sense. As soon as you get past 2 kids, you go from a man to a zone with parents, right? And so when you do that, you have to be less helpful. You have to become more adaptable. You have to solve problems on your own. Just by very nature, it kind of forces the parents to actually do the behavior that you kind of want to see to create that dependence. Now, it can go so far and so extreme that you are creating a family dynamic that is negative because there are so many kids that are not given the right conditions for success. So that's the first piece, I think, is siblings are so key. Go ahead.
Oh, is there any data on, are there negative returns at a certain number of children, a certain Number of kids where it's like, okay, the parents don't have enough time. What have you seen on that?
So the data I saw plateaus. So it basically
Okay.
says once you get, I think when I saw it was 5 kids, it's a negligible return after that. But it does not dip down. It kind of stays
That's interesting.
constant at that point, which makes sense. I mean, look, no offense to people who are only kids, but I've talked to them and they struggle getting along with people, dealing with a married and dealing with a spouse, like not having to have to live or share something, going to college and living with their roommates. Like it is a very different world when you are that only child. And the other thing is my parents started having kids when they were 19, 20. And while we kind of villainize that, and I get why, we want people to be financially secure and ready to have kids. Well, guess what? As soon as we're ready to have kids, we do too much. We, outsource chores and we can have everything paid for. We chauffeur them to all these activities. We don't let them sit in the suck. We don't let them embrace the challenging times and so on. And so I think that another thing that my parents did that plays a crucial role is they had kids before they were deemed ready to have kids. And that allowed them to give opportunities for struggle, I think. And here's the thing that they had an immense amount of unconditional love. So growing up in an environment where maybe financially we don't have everything figured out yet and we're having kids young, that can work if there's that unconditional love. If you have both, you don't have either, that can be problematic, right? I'm born in an environment without that. So going back to my kids though, I want to see my kids do dangerous things with a safety net provided. I do not want that to provide the answer to most things for them. I want them to solve their own problems in a healthy way. There's also been studies that show kids who play with knives, play with fire, drive before the age of 12 in some capacity are actually signs of go-getters, entrepreneurs, problem solvers, and so on. And so I want my kids to do those all with some level of a safety net, but I don't want to be there, stopping them from falling every step of the way. So those are some of the things that I see as important on how I raise our kids and have that productive struggle with them.
A while ago, and I don't know if you knew this, but I come from a very large family. So I have 14 biological siblings. I'm number two
Ooh,
in that lineup. So I mean, I've
other
only
side too.
yeah. So it's funny you bring this up because what number are you?
I'm 2 as well. 4 though, not 14.
Yeah, right. Well, and there's something funny that happens. My mom had her first child when she was 20. Also, yeah, married as a teenager. And a lot of people criticize that. And I'm going, oh, well, that's fine. I mean, I can see the pros and cons, sure. But there's an interesting piece too. My mom also asked my opinion a lot, and my dad at a very young age because
They didn't have the answers. They were figuring it out with
right,
you.
yeah, they were kids. We were all young together, and it's funny. And now my younger siblings have a very different set of parents who have been
Yes.
through it, and so my youngest sister, who is 5 now, it's going to be a very different upbringing because her parents are kind of the age of some grandparents, right? And so it's a different dynamic, but there are huge advantages. And I had someone that didn't know that I came from a big family that was really critical of, oh man, those people that have just tons of kids, they have no idea how much damage it does for the children. And especially the older kids, they never get to have a normal life and it just ruins them and they don't experience happiness and they have all this responsibility at a young age and that's just so terrible. They don't get a chance to be kids. And I said, well, I'll give validity to that. I don't know, right? And maybe I'm more messed up than I realize. But like, I'm so grateful that I had to grow up really early. I don't think that my childhood was anything but charmed. But at the same time, there was a lot of responsibility at a young age. Didn't remove my fun. It just said, hey, like also develop some valuable skills. And those things have transferred into every part of the workplace that in massive ways. So it's just kind of a funny thing. Yeah, it's fascinating that I think a lot of these, we put up safety nets all the time in order to protect kids from all the horrible things of responsibility and chores and whatever. But we're now finding that those kids are the least prepared to hit the workplace and
We're
actually be successful as adults.
we're delaying adulthood by doing this. And this can be really kids are way more capable of what we think they are. I mean, this has been proven time. And if you look at kids who grow up in a third world country, for example, the ability that they have at the ages of 3, 4, 5, 6 are astronomically greater in certain capacities than they are in more developed societies. And so what I'm seeing is just this extreme pendulum of we are delaying responsibilities and delaying growth opportunities past the point of no return. There's a certain point where the brain has become developed, and what we've kind of grasped as that the who we are is very much going to stick with us for a long time. And so I totally am a strong believer in, putting lofty, responsibility and goals in front of my kids to allow them to grow and rise with that challenge. Kids will usually meet you where you put the bar. And this is a problem in education, is we've lowered the bar so much across the entire spectrum to make sure everyone passes that we now have mediocrity because they'll meet you out where the bar is. So I think the more we can raise that bar in a healthy way, I think we can grow up in those large families really well.
Oh man, I could not agree more. And I like that expression, delaying adulthood. It's not something, and I think that there's a belief, it'll stunt creativity. It's funny because I've not seen that. I know a lot of big families. Full disclosure, I'm from Idaho, so we know lots of big families. But it's funny because I'm like, I don't see lack of creativity. In fact, I almost see the exact opposite, because I think that's oh my goodness, like they grew up too fast. They don't get a chance to be kids, and they end up with all these developmental issues. And I haven't seen that, and maybe I'm missing something, but all I see is just better adjusted adults that when they do hit the workplace, they're able to produce success quicker and live more fulfilled lives.
So one of my favorite TED Talks is from Sir Ken Robinson, Schools Are Killing Creativity.
Sir Ken Robinson?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's he's passed away now. I've met him a couple times before he did. And he basically said that all the data shows that we are creative geniuses up until the point we start going into traditional school. And by the end of high school, less than 2% of us are creative geniuses. And he actually walks through how the school system inherently weeds this out of our students. So going back to your point of, well, who's going to be more creative? Here's what I would argue. Anyone who has a lot of younger siblings knows that the imagination and the creativity of the 4, 5, 6-year-olds is phenomenal. And as you become an older sibling, you get to continue to live on in that imagination as you're with your younger siblings. You get to think, wild, crazy thoughts with them in that. So I've seen the opposite, and I would agree with you that there's so much opportunity for imagination, creativity, and thinking this way by staying playful. The best way to stay playful is to stay around young kids who are always in a playful spirit.
I love that so much. I want to jump topics here, and we're running just a bit low on time, but I think if we're okay going just a couple minutes over, I'd love for you to speak on this. I have a belief, and I'd like you to actually add some real understanding from your field of work. I suspect that AI is going to revolutionize our world 10x what the internet did. And not so much that it's, who knows what it'll actually do long term, but before we didn't have the infrastructure for internet, so there was a slow fuse for rolling this out. And now we have the hardware, and it feels like we're going to see a jump that's enormous in a very short number of years. I mean, I don't know, maybe compared to 1960 to 2000, and we'll see that in a 10-year period. I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, what do you think the world's going to look like here in the next 10 years with AI?
This is pretty much all I talk about to education reform. So I am out on the road speaking to superintendents, district leaders on basically outlining what potentially could come. And the reality is no industry, none of us are ready for the shift that is about to happen from AI. Right now, the World Economic Forum just put out a bunch of studies that showed that 85 million jobs will be disappearing in the next 2 years due to AI. And the good news is 97 million new jobs are predicted to create in the next 2 years from AI as well. It will not be the people global. That's a global market, to be specific. It is not those same 85 million that we're losing. They're not going to be stepping into those AI jobs for the most part, unfortunately. And so to answer your question of how our world will change, I think the internet was just a small taste precursor into now this much bigger jump. The internet was a step in moving us out of the knowledge era, where knowledge no longer has much value in our society. If you think about it, with generative AI, the knowledge is readily available out there. And right now, AI is going after those white collar jobs, accounting jobs, clerical jobs, office jobs, and customer service jobs. I think in 5 years, you would most likely you're not going to ever talk to a human when you call customer support anywhere. Right now, you're already talking to AI now, and you don't even know you're talking to AI. That's how good it is already. We're seeing in meetings and events that people are sending their AI avatars to the meetings and just
I've heard
recapping the
about that.
conversations. And we're only at the start of it, though. There's another AI technology that you can have a FaceTime with an AI human avatar, and it can analyze and read your body language and emotions more accurately than a human can. And so, all of this to say, our entire workforce is about to be flipped upside down. The internet was just a small blip of a precursor to this new era of work. And that's what our organization is focused on. How will schools stay relevant in this new economic world that we're headed for? And this is also why I am the co-president of a nonprofit called the Human Intelligence Movement. And here's the premise of the movement. We believe that we need to stop creating an education system that is training our kids to compete against AI. That is a losing battle. AI will always be better than me at writing a 5-paragraph essay and knowing what Pythagorean's theorem is, right? And so we believe that the key to staying relevant as a species in the future of work is that we must build our human intelligence. What makes us uniquely human? How do we foster those skills? And it is our ability to dream up the impossible. It's our ability to, convince people to believe in what we believe. It is our ability to collaborate and collectively work on solving really immense big problems that AI cannot do alone. AI will be a partner alongside humanity, but we have to focus on building an education system that is making it to where we have relevancy in that workforce right now.
So, I mean, this feels kind of like it feels like we're not ready because we've never had something to compare it to. Because I had someone say, "Oh, this is like the internet." I'm like, I don't think it is. I really don't. I don't think this is like the internet at all. That was a delayed fuse. There were so many things why yes, it revolutionized our world, but they always say that fact is stranger than fiction. And it feels like we're stepping into almost a dystopian type of society in a weird way because it'll change so quickly that we couldn't, and this goes to say, even in the 1970s, if I'd gone to someone and said, "Hey, there will be a day very soon where you'll be able to grab a little box in your hand and be able to have a normal conversation over the internet like we're doing right now," it would be so far beyond belief it would feel like magic. And I guess we have telephone calls, but that feels woo-woo, And it feels like we're going to be living in that in the next decade. But 10x that. And so it's actually kind of freaks me out a little bit in a good way. Like, I'm excited for the future, but I also recognize that there's going to be huge transfers of wealth, a huge transfers of resources, and economically, I think that we're going to, from my perspective, it seems like we're going to see some really big socioeconomic changes. And if you're on the upward curve of this, it'll be amazing. But go ahead.
Well, I think the only historical time that this has happened is the industrial age. And you can really specifically point to that moment in time, the printing press, the steam engine, these kind of components, because we did not really advance as a society for thousands upon thousands of years. And if you went back, 500 years or 1,000 years, the world did not look that much different. You look at 1700 to 1800 to 1850, you went from, agriculturalistic societies that were more rural and spread out to major cities with 25-story skyscrapers, with planes flying in the air. If you went and took someone from the 1600s and brought them to the 1800s, they would not recognize a single thing in their entire world. And if you take someone from the 1800s-ish and you fast forward to today, I think actually they wouldn't see much. It would be recognizable, right? So there was a moment in time when everything in society as we knew it changed drastically. And we saw the disruption. All jobs look different, right? Like the jobs of pre-industrial age versus 50 years after the industrial age were not the same at all. And so that is what I believe is going to happen with AI, is the vast majority of jobs that we see today will not exist tenfold, way more than the internet has disrupted. It's one of my struggles right now in education, for example. When we talk about workforce readiness, we talk about CTE, career and technology, education pathways. And it's like, are you going to go the nursing pathway? Are you going to go the accounting pathway? Are you going to go the welding pathway? And I think these are so backwards because we need to build universally human skills at this point, because those jobs are likely to not exist or look so vastly different in the next 5-10 years.
So, and this is my last question, and we're over time but I'd love to get a perspective on this. What do people do if you were to kind of really sum it down to the most basic elements? What can people do to prep for this big wave?
I think when we look at, I would look at two things. There's IQ, AQ, and EQ, right? The intelligence quotient, and then there's emotional quotient and adaptability quotient. And as a society, we focused for a long time on IQ. I think that right now, all humans need to be focusing on developing that emotional intelligence and that adapt intelligence. And so what that looks like is the willingness to be curious, to be hungry, to be adaptable to whatever is to come is going to be the single greatest skill set in surviving this change that is upon us. So if you are in any profession, for us, we deal with lots of teachers, right? The way we were taught to be teachers is no longer going to work in this new workforce. So if we have that fixed mindset and we are unwilling to try and be open-minded and question our reality and question things around us, we're going to be set up for failures here, because a lot of teachers are asking me, will I be replaced by AI? No, you won't be replaced by AI, but you will be replaced by a teacher who uses AI. We are all going to have to learn to live in this new world where we have to become excellent stewards and users of the internet and of AI, something that I think we are not good at right now. If you look at the anxiety of kids today, the depression of kids today, and the addiction to things like social media and scrolling, all of these things are going to be difficult if we don't intentionally develop our kids to overcome kind of the negative uses of this technology and start focusing on teaching our kids and teaching ourselves how to be curious, hungry users of this technology every single day as it changes rapidly.
I love that. Travis, thank you for sharing so much of your wealth of knowledge. And I wish we had about 3 more hours to go over more of this stuff. But thank you for taking the time. For those that want to learn more about what you're doing, where can they go for resources?
You can go to ProSolve.com to learn about our game-based curriculum where kids are put in a post-apocalyptic world where all the adults have vanished and they have to rise up and survive as a class. Builds all the things we talked about, those human skills. So that's where you can go. You can also go to humanintelligence.org to join the movement to help education pursue a different destination and purpose of school.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. As always, I'm not running ads. So the best thing you can do to show thank you, if you got any kind of value out of this at all, please leave a review and share it with your friends. We'll see you on the next episode.